Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. Today's video is part 17 in the 68 fastback build known as Fangled. Now in part 16 I worked on putting the TCI suspension under the front of the car. I welded in reinforcement plates, I welded in the cross member and the little struts that hold the upper control arm and the coilover shock. But at this point I need to get the car off of my trailer jig. If you don't know, I built this jig out of a boat trailer, and I used two Mustangs that were not wrecked, straight cars. And when I did this, I set the trailer underneath my lift, underneath those cars, and I lowered the body above the trailer. And then I built struts and pieces to hold the body in place during construction or reconstruction, however you want to look at it. And now I can't do anything else because the back of the car, I'm ready to put in the rear differential, all the plates, all the assembly stuff, which I'm going to show you in a second, and I can't do it on the jig, so it's going to have to go up on my lift so that I can work on the bottom of the car. Let me show you the pieces and parts that are going to go into the back part of the Mustang. So to start with, you have two frame connectors. And those interact with this big centerpiece that also interacts with the floor pan of this car. This is a convertible floor pan, so it has these mounts that go into the original location on the bottom of the car, because on a convertible floor pan you have a more industrial strength center section. You've got this seat support that is connected all the way across, and then underneath the car you have this boxy piece, and there are bolt holes in it, and those correspond to that big center section. So the plan is to get all this in place, and they all interact. There's also this center piece right here, and that is part of the connection to the rear differential. So you've got mount points at these locations, you've got a panhard bar location, and you have this mount system here and here, and all of that interacts with these pieces overall. You'll see. Also, just to show you, this is I think is the rear sway bar, and I think this one is the front sway bar if I remember correctly. This is the panhard bar. This piece mounts across the rear of the car, and that is where the sway bar mounts, and I believe also the coilover shocks mount to that. Then you have two arms with end links here that'll connect to the rear end, and then this is part of the panhard bar if I remember correctly, and then this support structure, and all of that will be shown as I progress through this. In these boxes I have the shocks. This is the master cylinder and then other brake components and a bunch of hardware that goes with all of this. So what I need to do is get this up in the air and get it off of the jig. Okay, I've talked about these pieces. I'll show you where those go, where this crossbar goes. And I was concerned because when I was initially looking through all this stuff, all I saw was this bag facing this way. I didn't see that the instructions were in that bag. So I had dug through my old paperwork that I had from the other car, and I was hanging on to stuff, so I actually had a set of plans here to put that together. But now that I have that one, I can set that one aside. So there's a bunch of components in here. There's going to be bolts and plates, and I'm just going to open this up so that you can see what all is in here and the ever important instructions. So when you look at this picture, that's kind of the layout you're going to see in this whole thing. Like there's that big cross piece I talked about, frame connectors, the crossbar, sway bar, all these different pieces and parts. So I'm going to go over obviously the install of that. Now these are your sway bar end links or attachment points. Here's some little brackets and plates that will come to play later on. Some bushings, I'm sure that's probably related to these links. There's a secondary bolt kit in here. I'm not going to dump that out. I want to keep all those pieces together. But you can see it's got these angled plates. There's 2 of those. And there's also some bushings in here, spacers, big bolts and nuts. This one has a torque arm install bolt kit. So there's a couple of bolts. There's some end links, some heim joints. So you see those. Another little bolt kit. This one is the, I don't know what it says, panhard bar bolt kit. So a series of bolts and plates in there as well. And another one, rear shock bolt kit. So you've got these great big bolts here and some spacers. Now I want to keep all that stuff kind of together. We'll push that down to the end. This one says torque arm 3-link strut kit. So we have a couple pieces of bar stock that's threaded. It is a pipe actually. I thought it was bar stock. It's see-through, so it's a pipe. A couple of those. Some really long bolts. Another packet of heim joints and spacers. And then this last kit over here on this side, it says subframe bolt kit. Now, I believe, if I remember looking at the instructions, that this is the start point, or part of the start point. You've got these plates here, a couple of those. These are going to end up on the floor. When this is all bolted together, the frame connectors that come up around the floor support, these sit on top and the bolts go up through. The option would be to weld these on, but right now it'll be bolted as it should be. We've also got a couple of strap pieces here and another bolt kit. Doesn't have any identification on it. So I want to show you as we go. We'll look at these instructions briefly. So it shows you a before picture and after picture. So you can see all the detail there. And the first thing it talks about is mounting up these plates in where the leaf spring would mount. Drilling some holes, adding some bolts going into the floor pan. Here it's showing that plate and then the interaction with the, I believe it's the frame connector piece. Here they're showing the frame connector, and they're using a mallet to drive it up over the floor support. This is different because that's for a coupe, and so the convertible has reinforcement there. You can't just drive that up on like that, but I'll show you more of that. There's that plate that's going to go on top, as I talked about. Drilling holes through to put in hardware. All this stuff, you'll see it as I go through the process. Lots of bolts and holes and fitment, stuff like that. So, to start off, I want to show you where some of the stuff goes underneath the car. Now, in the previous build that I did of this, I noted that the dynacorn frame rails were wider than the factory ones. And it appears that they have taken these pieces, and I know it's hard to see, but it's actually tapered. It's only going to fit kind of one way now. And if I remember, I'll have to look for sure, but I'm pretty sure this one goes on the driver's side. And it's going to go somewhere. See, it doesn't want to fit. And it starts to fit really good right there. Like it's wider than the frame rail in certain locations. So it's got an actual taper to it. Like I couldn't put this part up here, it won't fit. And if I come back here, you can see the play. So they have engineered this to fit closer to the dynacorn frame rails. And it's a snug fit, and I'm very happy with that. Same thing with this one. slight taper. I know it's hard to see that, but it kind of fits like in one spot. Now this bar is for the sway bar and the shock mounts. And if you look at the end of that, this is tapered. So it's not going to fit but one way. Now, I can set this up in here, move it, and it's going to come close to the gas tank or the drop down on the transition panel here, but I can wiggle it around a little and figure out, basically that's where it's going to end up. Somewhere in that zone right there. Now, these pieces are going to fit over the floor support. And this one may be for, this one's probably for the driver's side, based on how it looks, where it's coming out of the back, but that's where that'll end up. And that interacts with the rear frame rail. Let me grab the other one. So this one, get it up in place, and it tapers to the side over this way. It tapers to that side. We'll end up somewhere about there. So you can see it tapers over towards this frame rail. Now the other piece, I don't know if I'm going to try to lift it up or not. Let me go grab it, see if I can't make it fit up into that location. So now the big spider looking piece is going to go up here. I don't know if I can hold it and get a bolt in it or not. Try. Okay, so these pieces in the back here, if I can back the camera up a little bit so you can see better. So with that up in place, you can now see this plate here is going to overlap that frame connector. Can't put the frame connector up in place and hold it there because this piece overlaps that, and that frame connector has a flange up at the top which goes up against the bottom of the floor, so I just can't put it up there at this moment. Same thing over here. This will all interact together with the frame connector, and this aligns again with that frame rail. And then that center strut piece, I can't show the differential obviously, but that center strut piece goes through this hoop right here, and it's going to connect right here. So there's a lot of interaction and pieces and parts that have to go together to make this work. And I'm going to show you that whole process. So, according to the instructions, the very first thing you put on is this plate. And there are two of these, and they are identified left and right based on this angle cut here. So this is for the driver's side. And they're telling you you're going to use a 5/16 drill bit. And you're going to drill up through the plate and attach it where the front shackle mounts. So let me show you what's involved with that, because it doesn't quite, I mean it fits. It's going to go onto that bolt okay, but you look up there and it doesn't have a good transition. So this is kind of rounded, and I don't know how critical it is. Like if you back this plate up a little bit, the angle changes. You can see this corner where it meets the bottom of that flat section of the frame. You bring this forward and put it in that right location, and now that's angled down. So I feel like I'm going to do some modification up there. I may try to just hit this and drive it up and square it off a little bit just to make this fit flush the way I feel like it should. There's also some buildup here of excess weld that'll interfere with the fitment, so I'm going to address that. The other choice would be to grind off the very end of this, create a curve on that to let it sit up higher. You know, I like to have details expressed here, and I feel like they intended this to sit up like that. So let me address this situation, and then the other thing it talks about is drilling up through those holes. Well, in this case, you've got this hollow cavity here, which I'm sure it's factory. It's probably for, well, I don't know what it's for exactly, if it's for the parking brake assembly or not. I don't remember. Just seems kind of odd you have that transition, but it may also be related to the convertible floor pan. So if we put this all the way forward like that, like it should be, we have just a couple of holes. It may be beneficial to just weld this in. I don't know. Let me think about it. I want to show you this. This is the plate for the passenger side, and you can see I rounded off that corner just a little bit, and these are the plates that are supposed to go above it whenever you put this in the car. Now, the problem, as I pointed out a second ago or a minute ago, was you have this gap up here. So on this side, I did use a punch and a hammer and knock it up just a little, and I think that's going to be just fine. But you can see, like back here, you couldn't even put a bolt there. And these forward two pieces, or locations, the width of the plate is actually wider than the frame rail. So you wouldn't be biting into much. Now on the driver's side, I did the same thing. I reshaped the top just a little and knocked that up, and you can see with the alignment of that hole, that's much closer. So the other thing I want to tell you is these bag kits. So this, all of this, these plates were in this kit when I opened them up and showed you all this. And these bolts, well, they don't go to this. The instructions tell you to use the 6.5 inch bolts, and they're not in here. Those bolts are over here in this kit. Now this is all part of it, obviously, and these are relatable, these brackets. So these are the bolts you're going to use to put that in place. And like I said, I'm probably going to end up just welding this, because I don't like those 3 small bolts. Even with that plate on top, I don't feel good about it. So I'm going to set these up in place, and we'll take another look. Well, this is where I say, Houston, we have a problem. You know, I tell you all the time, test fit, test fit, test fit, right? So this plate is located based on this bolt that goes through the forward mount for the leaf spring. There's no changing that. That's where it's going to be. So the plate is lined up on that, and then this frame connector is intended to slide over the forward portion of the floor support. I'll show you that a little closer in a second. And then these bolts, or some bolts, not these particular bolts, I'm just using this as an example, are supposed to go through that and line up, and that's not happening. Like this bolt is hitting about 1/2 inch behind that hole. So that's not good. Let me show you more on that. So there you can see where those holes don't line up, and you come forward, and the problem is I can't come any more further forward. Now this is supposed to fit these cars. This is made for the convertible, so I don't understand what's going on, why this is not the right length, basically. And here's why it matters. So this is that cage spider thing that goes in the middle of the car, and location of this, or fitment of this, here's a bolt going through that hole, and it'll go through that hole, and these are the holes that relate to these locations. So The only thing I can see, because I'm not going to change their geometry here, and I can't move anything back because this is your anchor. This is your start point. So I'm going to have to modify this. You can't change these holes because it won't matter. Those have to come forward. The whole thing has to come forward. So I'm going to have to cut off, I don't know, half an inch or more to get this in the right location. And that affects these holes, which are meant to hold this through the floor pan. So I've got some modding to do, but that's why we test fit. So I reviewed one of my old videos that I did, and I had the exact same issue on the convertible project, the Brooklyn Pony. So I trimmed off 5/8 of an inch of the driver's side channel piece, and so now it's sitting forward, and back here this bolt goes in just fine. However, this bolt will not. And I don't know, you know, when they engineer these things, I'm sure, I'm not even sure. I wonder sometimes, do they retest these on occasion? Do they ever try to put one on a car and see how well it works? Because with that being up where it should be flush, that bolt in place, this bolt in this back one, the only thing I can do, I don't want to remake that hole. I'm going to take the vice grips off, and that allows that to come down. So I can put a bolt in there, but that just kind of sits a little weird. So I think what I'm going to do, because I've already given up on the idea of putting any bolts in this up here, and I'm looking at how parallel this is, how much space. So if I push this up a little bit, that makes a nice snug or little gap underneath that, and allows this to sit up a little higher. And I think I'm just going to run with it. Like, I'm just going to leave it that way, because it's actually a nice clean even gap, and as long as the bolts go in back here, you know, they slot this hole so you can have that movement. I would rather do it that way than to rebend or try to force something into place. If I push this up from out here, that's fine. That's going to work out just fine. So that'll solve that dilemma. And it actually makes this look better too, because when I push this up, that squares up with that bottom of that plate. So I'm going to go with that. I'll do the same thing on that side, and then I think I'll weld these plates in place, make them permanent. I really do enjoy welding this thicker metal. Once I have everything in place and I'm comfortable with how the bolts fit the holes, I'm going to go ahead and weld this. Now, I've learned from experience that when I weld, if I weld downward, I end up with a better weld overall. When you go up, it tends to pile up and get kind of thick, and you end up dragging the weld upward. But when you weld down, it just flows nicely and creates a really, really nice weld. So once this plate is taken care of and welded in, I fill in a couple little gaps that I didn't like up here at the top, and then I move on to the front section, and I'm going to be drilling the holes in the frame connector pieces. Now, I'd used my little jack here to hold this up against the bottom of the car, and then I drilled the holes. Now, there's a variety of ways you can do this. What I did, I started the hole with a larger bit so that I could get the center, and that creates a pilot for the smaller drill to follow. Once I do that, I go back through with a larger bit and clean up the hole and make it work, and then I drill it up through the floor pan. So, as you can see now, I have these bolts in place, and what I did is I moved this one further aft. I could have come all the way up into this corner, but I didn't like the way this was transitioned, so I elected to come back a little further. I did the same thing on the other side, but I didn't go quite as far back. I just came back a little, so it's similar to what this one is. And then I finished drilling these holes, these 1/2 inch holes that those bolts go through. And just so you know, this is the piece that I cut off was about 5/8 of an inch, and that made enough room for that to slide up into place. Now this is meant to be bolted on, and I'm going to leave it that way, but this back section, as I mentioned, I did not want to have this bolted on because I don't like the way this would have worked out up here, or this one, or that hole. So now it is welded, and that's not going anywhere. At least it shouldn't go anywhere. Now the option would be, if I wanted to, I could add another bead of weld inside here, you know, because this is a round pipe. I may add a little. I don't know if I really need to at this point, but that plate is now in a fixed location. And whenever I tighten these bolts, because I want you to drill these holes first, and so these holes, I did start drilling these and I stopped. I was using a smaller bit, and then I decided to go ahead and finish these. So what happens is when you tighten these bolts up, this draws up pretty snug against the base here. Putting a jack under here only did so much good, but tightening the bolts drew it up. And then I finished drilling these holes to make sure they were 1/2 inch. So what it ended up doing was making that snug, really snug back here against the bottom of this transition, panel. This one that goes all the way. And this is not normally on a coupe. These are only on the convertible cars. So now that's tight. There's just a little bit of a gap up here at the front, and then everything else worked out back here. As I look at this, I realize this curve, that's a curve, and this is square. And when I was talking about this at the beginning, pushing this plate up to make it work, it can work that way, but because of this configuration, you have to go with how these interact with the pipe. Because if you did push that up and then try to bolt this together, it wouldn't happen. And that's why they kind of tell you to leave everything loose so that you can move things around. Like these bolts, they still move. The top one turns. This one's a little snug, but it moves. It's just a little bit snug at the moment. I can actually get it loose by pushing around on this pipe and get it to come out. But I have to use 2 hands for that. So I'm going to finish up the other side, getting all that in place, and then I'll set that main spider thing, whatever you want to call it, up in the middle here, and see how well it interacts with these pieces after I get all that done. Okay, now we're at the point where we can start working more on this section. It tells you in the instructions that there's a bolt here that is a 3.5 inch, and the two in the front where it cups are 4-inch bolts. So it tells you to put this in, this bracket. These are specific from side to side. So this goes here, you put a washer on, and that is going to rotate up and interact with this bolt. So what I want to do temporarily, as it says in the instructions, is to put the nut and washer on and keep it loose. Now here, take this bolt back out. And it says to back this out, this bolt. Hopefully you can see that okay. Let me change the angle just a little bit. It says to back this bolt out, and then there are 2 bushings, and they're different lengths. And this all ties in to this piece, and it tells you that the longer the bushing will go to the inside up against the frame. So probably have to play around just a little bit to get it up in there. And of course it's not going to just slide on the bolt like you would expect it to. Why should it? I mean, it's only a 1/2 inch, right? It's only supposed to fit on that bolt. There we go. Let's do a couple dry runs on these, I guess. Get all the burrs out of them. Okay. You can see I'm not practicing this. I'm showing you like firsthand doing it. So put this up, and then this one goes on the other side. Yep, same thing. Same thing. I ran it. Yep. So that cutout, which is slotted, won't let the bolt go through. A little easier, I'm going to take this 1/2 inch step drill. Just kind of let it knock it down a little. Normally I would take a rotary file and deburr that. There we go. Like I said, I don't do this as if I've practiced putting it together 10 times and then try to show you that it's easy. I'm trying to show you real interactions here. So now that that's in place, out here you put the washer and the nut. Now, that's as far as I'm going to get with that at the moment. There's going to be an arm that goes in here and another bolt that'll go through this. So I'll get the other side set up and then we'll look at it again. Now, since I have everything else in place, we're going to do a quick test fit on what I'm calling the spider. I don't know what it's really called, but I'm going to call it the spider. So this should hopefully fit in place. And you know, I did this before on the convertible, the 66 convertible, and it looks like we're going to have a similar, possibly a similar situation. There's a gap on either side, which I don't like, but I'll figure something out with that. Rotate this up, and I'm going to see if I can't get it to go in the back. I got to take that one bolt out, or take it loose. Please fit, please fit, please fit. Nope. Nope. I am not surprised. Let me see if I can, nope. So I ran into this before with the other project. The width is off. Now, some of that could be from whenever they welded it together. Normally they put this in some sort of a jig, and it should maintain its shape. But I think what's happened is this has spread apart slightly because the width is no good. I'm going to grab a tape measure quick. Okay, need to figure out what this measurement is. So Measuring across these two plates all the way at the back, I'm at 35 1/4. Come forward, and it's 35 1/8. So a little bit of a difference from front or from back to front. 35 1/4, inside to inside. Yeah, 35 1/8. Let's see what the measurement is on the spider, as I'm calling it. So at the front, that's at 35 5/8, and the back is at 35 7/8. Yeah. So I'm gonna have to compress this some, one way or another, to get it to fit in there. But I'll figure that out later. Well, I'm gonna try something. Since I need to compress this, I'm gonna go with the basics and try to use a strap and just pull this together until it fits. I know the other one I had problems with before. I think one of these tubes was out of position, and I had to do something else to straighten it out to make that work. But we're going to see if we can't massage this in and make it fit. Now I know I'm under tension here. I'm drawing it in. That's right at 35 at that point, and this needs to be about 35 1/4, I think is what we've agreed to. I'm going to go a little further. See if I can't find some way to hurt myself doing it this way. Okay. Now, the fun part. All right, that's pretty relaxed. That's still 35 1/2. Woo! I don't want to heat this up with a torch or anything. I really don't. I'll try this a couple more times and see if I can't get it to go in. So I've made some progress. As you can see, I have it up in place, and I was able to draw these two legs in together with the strap to make it fit inside of the plates. And then when I set this up, tried to get this up here, this would not fit. And the reason, I'm guessing, is these pipe pieces are slightly sprung down. So what I ended up doing was taking a jack and using a rod, a piece of 1-inch square tubing, and jacking up here in order to press this up. And I did that on both sides. Now, there are variables with all of these. I understand that. The body, the parts, whether it's more in tune with an original car or how it interacts with the aftermarket pieces. So we could have variations with this, the size or dimensions of this, which affects the contact point from here to here, which affects the leg meeting back here. Now, I can adjust a lot of this, and I'm not done yet. I just pushed these up in place and slid these bolts in. So I know they're going to fit. I know that's going to work the way it should. But the other thing I've noticed is these bolt holes. Let's see if I can define those for you. So the bolt hole does not line up. Now again, this could be this piece, aftermarket, original, variations. But There's no way to get a bolt in there. So what I may end up doing, before I show you that, well, let me say this. I may end up welding these holes shut and making a new hole where these already are. There's really not much choice. You can't, I say you can't, you could cut this off, but this thing is welded completely top and bottom all the way around, and you would just destroy it taking it off. Just a piece of angle iron, but it'd be easier to fill this hole in and make a new one. Here's something else. So if you look at this distance, how far this edge is from this edge, right? Come over to this side, and you can see this is different. It's not quite double the width, but close to it. So even that comes into play with how these holes are going to line up. The other thing, and this is minor, but this bolt hole is just slightly off, and I'll be able to get those in, I know. I've run into this with the other one that I did, and part of that is this gap. So they make this, you would think, to fit snug inside of this channel. So you can see there's about a 1/4 inch gap there and about a 1/4 inch gap there. Now on the other car, what I did is I ended up cutting these ends off, and I made my own plates to fill that up. And I may do the same thing, because the alternative is I have to put a plate inside of this one way or the other to fill that gap, or just, I wouldn't do this, but put washers to take that space up. This also affects this bolt. So this right now, this bolt is bottomed out against the base, and there's still some threads short with this, and there's no washers in there. So I may end up looking at getting some longer bolts. It's just the way it is. I've talked about this system. You can't change the location of this bolt. That bolt goes into the shackle mount, and that dictates all these other pieces. And this bolt dictates this location, which is for the lower arms that are going to connect to the differential. So I know I've had some people suggest, well, just do this or just do that or make new holes. You can't do that. All of this stuff ties together based off of the shackle mount. So keep that in mind. The other thing is that this piece here is going to interact with the torque arm that connects to the differential. So there's many pieces that interact. So I'm going to have to do some of my own customizing to make this fit the way that it should, but that's what I do. So I've been experimenting. As I think I showed it, I was using, I used a jack to push these arms up to get them more in line with this plate. And the problem I ran into as I was jacking up, it wanted to hit the floor pan. Part of that problem is how this interacts. So when I started off, I had the bolts, I had this front bolt right here going through that hole, and when I rotated this up, it started to bind right here, and that caused these to sit low. Also, I pointed out and I showed, this was too narrow, and I took the strap and pulled it together, and so now it fits almost dead on the width. Now I've already talked about this, but I don't want to talk about it again so everybody understands the physics here. So this bolt that goes through this plate, that goes through the mount point for the leaf spring for the front, can't change that. That's where it's going to be. Also, these two bolts go through this plate, they connect to this arm, and they all interact the same way. You're not going to change this, because this is connected here, here, and here. And then the swing arm is going to go here. So as I'm fighting with this, I'm realizing there's a little bit of a gap there, and a little bit of a gap there. And on this side, it's the same kind of situation. A little bit of a gap in there. Now I had assembled these outside of the car. So I had the frame connector attached to what I'm calling the spider, and they all bolted together fine. Part of the conflict has been, as I said, I put this bolt in, rotated up, and then it wanted to bind. So I took everything out and I was able to run bolts up into these, but then that threw everything off. Like it would work here, but it wouldn't work anywhere else. So then I put the bolts in the back and decided not to try to put these bolts in. Well, you can see that bolt hole is maybe not quite half a hole above the alignment here. Also, these bolts do not line up now. So the bolt hole is back here. So I'm just experimenting at the moment. One of the ideas I had was to actually cut this at an angle, extend this forward and up slightly, which would compensate here, up and slightly forward. This would have to get welded shut and then make a new hole at these locations. I don't really want to do it that way, but that is one option. The other option is I'm going to take these bolts back out here, move this forward. As I said, I've already had these bolts in these holes, and I'm going to do it again and just see how close. I know this isn't going to go up any higher, but it almost needs to come forward just a little. And what I may end up doing, as I did with the other car, I cut these plates off, I made new ones, and drilled the holes, put the plate in place, and then welded it all together so that it actually fits the car. So this is just part of the issues you have with these kits. And I'm going to try a few different things until I find the right answer for me to make things fit. Like I said, you can't change this. That's the location for that bolt hole. And that lines everything else. So let me see what I can come up with. So I took the two bolts out of the back on each side, and I slid this back far enough to get these bolts in, and that didn't help. Like this, you can see how far off those holes are now. So that's definitely not the answer. I had thought about redoing these holes and using, just welding them shut and drilling new holes, but that is not going to work. And up front here, it made it even worse. It sits much lower than it was even. So I think I'm going to go back to the idea of pushing this forward, leaving these holes alone, welding these shut and re-drilling them, and then doing my own custom work up here on the top in this front section, because there's only so much I can do to change what's going on. And it's like if you get one thing lined up, nothing else is going to line up. So I'll continue on. Now it does feel like I've been fighting this thing the whole way through the process. So here I am welding these holes shut, and I'm not doing a full weld all in one shot. I'm going from side to side and back and forth, letting them cool down slightly, and slowly building these holes closed, let's say. Now once I did all this, I did grind down these welds, smooth everything out so that I could follow up with the drill. Now you can see lines on the face of these angle brackets, and I drew a center line based on the original holes, and I used that as a reference point so that I could verify that I was on the right plane whenever it came time to make these holes happen. I used the step drill to go back through and break into the edges and smooth everything up, and it did take a little more fine tuning as I was working my way through these. Here I am putting it back up under the car, and I'm installing the bolts into the 6 holes, and then I use my cordless driver to tighten everything up and make sure it's going to fit snug. So here's where we're at. I now have all 6 bolts in those holes. I have that lined up, and as I talked about before, this doesn't exactly line up the way that I want it, and I have this gap between here. But since I hoard metal and I salvage things when I can, just so happens I have these plates, pretty much the exact thickness that I need, 1/4 inch. And these are left over from the boat trailer jig when I cut it up and salvage these. So what I'll end up doing, I'm going to cut this plate off and use it as a template to drill the holes for this. These two will be welded together. I'll stack them up and weld them in, or weld them to each other, and then position them with the bolts, and then tack weld the pipe back to this plate so that everything should line up the way that it's supposed to. Same thing over here, basically about a 1/4 inch. And by the time I cut this off, you consider the thickness of the cutting wheel, that's almost going to be perfect. So I'll get this separated and then we'll show the progress as I go. So when the weather is nice, I would rather be cutting metal outside because of all the dust and debris that ends up inside the shop, and also it just kind of floats in the air. So doing it outside, wearing safety gear, and cutting this makes it a lot easier and cleaner eventually, for the shop. So here I am drilling the filler plate. I start with a small pilot drill, step up to a larger drill, and then I moved on to my step drill. Now I will make the hole larger and then go to the other side and make sure the hole is all the way through and that there's no metal hanging on, so it's nice and clean and deburred. I do this on both ends of both of the plates, making sure the bolt slides through nicely and smoothly. And once I do all that, then I can move on doing the mock-up underneath the car to make sure everything is going to line up correctly. So you saw the time lapse where I cut off the end plates off of what I'm calling the spider and this forward bar. And so this is the plate for this side sitting loose, and then I added that filler plate behind it. You saw that I drilled that up and made it fit. So right now this is fitting very nicely, and so is this one. So I have both of these taken care of. I just need to weld them together, and then I'll weld the edge of this plate so these two are the same. I also have all the bolts in the middle of this spider piece, and of course the other bolts in the back are working out just fine. So once I get this welded, then I'll move on to the back section and start working on the mount points for the rest of it. Now I thought this was a good idea, making the bolts tight and securing everything to where you think it should be, but the angles were just a little bit off. Like the frame connector pieces tapered a little bit, and once I started welding and got everything tight, I had a hard time getting this back apart. So I ended up showing you in the video that I undo all this and start it over to make it right. Just wanted to show you, I had set these plates up in place, and these bolts come with these nylon nuts. And rather than run the nut all the way down into the locking nylon stuff, I added 3 washers on each side and then tightened these up so that the plates were tight up against this piece. And then I put the weld on this bottom edge, and I also welded the edges of the plates so that there's no chance of them moving. And now what I want to do is I'm going to take these back out. I've already started taking bolts out. And I'll take these back out and set it up on a stand and then finish welding the perimeter around the end of these pipes. Hey, you know what? I want to show you something, because when I make a mistake, I want to show it to you so that you don't make the same mistake. So I had already started to weld in the plates on the ends of this tube, and I showed you that in the time-lapse sequence. However, what I did not consider, I had bolted these tight against these pieces and then started welding. And that's all well and good, except I didn't consider the idea that maybe something could expand a little bit or kick this off a little bit. And I actually had a hard time getting this back out. I mean, a really hard time. So what I ended up doing was cutting the plates back off and starting over. And I also took razor blades and I put in there to act as a shim. The idea is these plates still can be bolted against this bracket piece, but I need to allow, because even if this fit perfect and I put paint here, it's still going to mess it up. It's still going to be a tight fit. So I just put some razor blades up behind this on both sides, and I can take a light and shine it through and see that there's a slight gap. And that's fine, because no matter what happens, this is going to bolt tight against this piece. So it just has some consideration for a slight gap if you're having to cut these off and redo this work. It shouldn't come to that, but we all know, like when I first started, there was a 1/4 inch gap on each end of this, and I could have just put some washers in there probably and done that and been done with it, but I like to have stuff solid. So just some information for you. You know, if I make a mistake, I want to show it to you so you don't make the same mistake. All right, I have welded the ends on, and just to show you now, this slides right up into place. Just the way I wanted it to, the first time. So, what I have done to make this easier, I've run bolts up into these brackets. So we get started there, left-handed and all. And put one on this side. And then I have my little impact, or cordless, that draws it up nice. And at this point, I should be able to put these bolts in. Look at that. That's two. One wants to give me a little trouble. Of course. That's how it works. There it is. Okay. So now that's going to take care of this front piece. All these bolts I know will go in. So I'm going to work on the back. I also put the bolts through the back plate, if I can show you that. So these go right in. So everything is now as close as I'm going to get it for this spider piece. So I'm going to put a stop on this part of it. I'm going to start working on the back section here, as I talked about, where I'm going to be putting in the channel pieces. They're going to go up here, so I'll have to do some measuring and make sure I get them in the right spot, and then we'll have another look at that. So what it's showing next is this bracket being attached, and you have this snubber here that is on the passenger side, and you see this has the opening facing in. Now this is intended for the panhard bar, I believe, and you have to get it up over this frame rail. It also says that you will knock this thing forward. See if I can show you here. You will put this piece here and then drive it forward so that it makes contact with this, and that is your stop point. Now, as I've run into this before, I was hoping I wouldn't have this problem. This doesn't fit. I mean, it's close, but it doesn't fit. If I come back here a little ways, I can sort of get it on, but it doesn't fit. So what I'm thinking, on the other car that I did, I ended up cutting this right here and separating this so that I could get it around that frame rail. This is closer than the other car for sure. Like I can almost get it started, but it gets bound up. And I think what I'll end up doing is driving this on. Like I'm not going to cut this thing. I want to knock it up into place, and once it's on, it's not coming off. There's no way I'm going to be able to drive this back off of this that I can tell. And there's no reason to. So once it's up, you've got these 3 holes again, just like, well, there's 2 holes. Here, there's 2 holes. There's one here on each end. That'll get bolts through it. And then it's got these holes. We'll talk more about those later, but it's going to end up with a bolt going through it as well. On the other car, I welded these solid. And I don't know that I'm going to do that on this one, but I'm going to have to get this up on there somehow. And it's the same situation on the other side. There is a similar channel. I'll turn the camera around. And this thing, it's tapered, it's wider at this end. Has 2 bolts, one front and back. And this one actually slips a little bit, is a little bit closer to going on without fighting. But I know I'm going to have to drive this up on there. And yeah, let me see if I can make this one go. See what I'm talking about? I knew it was going to take some effort to get it on there. I just didn't think it would be this much effort. Whew, okay. Let me get out the big gun. It's not completely up against that snubber or that bracket, and I don't know if it's going to. Woo. All right. That one's on. Everything's falling out of the back of the car. Woo. Yeah. It's not going to get any. That's as far as it's going to go. So I need to do this on the same on the other side. And also I'm going to drill this hole and this hole, this hole, and this hole, run the bolts up through, and then cross drill these bolts. And they've got a little tool for doing that, but you have to drill the first hole, and then it shows you it has a bushing. Let me show you that. Okay, so like I said, I'll drill these holes, run the bolts up through. There's plates that go on top. Drill these holes, and then you take this drill guide and you clamp it onto this face, and you run your drill in it at the same time. And what it does is it keeps the drill bit square, right? So it acts as a guide. So whenever you're drilling, you should, in theory, perfectly aligned with the one on the opposite side, because you can't get to these from here. You have the drop flange for the gas tank, so there's no way to get a drill back there. So hope that makes sense to you. Can't see that very well. Once I drill this hole, I clamp it, put the drill in, clamp this on, and keep drilling. Okay. See if I can't get something done. As I did with the front, I started with a smaller drill. These bolts that were intended to go in here, they're not a very large bolt to begin with, but I use this drill to start the process, and then I follow up with the recommended drill for that bolt size. These things, they're difficult. You know, when you're trying to make things fit aftermarket panels, you're going to fight with these things every step of the way, it seems. Okay, I should know better by now. I should know better than to trust that TCI has improved on their product. When I did the Brooklyn Pony, we had similar problems to all of this, and it's continuing. And I'll show you what. I'll show you why I say this. So I drilled these holes for the bolts based on the holes that are already in the plates. Okay? And I tried to put the bolts in as they described. So you probably saw in my little time lapse how much trouble I was having. So let me just show you why this is ridiculous. So this bolt, or this nut, I don't know how well the light shows this, there's no give. Like, there's nowhere for this to go. You can see the edge distance, hopefully see the edge distance there, is very, very small. The wall thickness on this nut is thicker than that gap. Come to this side, same situation. Up here, might be able to get a nut on that one. Over here, I don't know. I haven't got the bolt all the way through just yet. I'm going to fight with it a little more and see if I can't turn the bolt with an Allen wrench and try to get the nut started. If not, well then I'll get out the hot glue gun and make this permanent. I didn't really want to do that, and I still may do it anyway, but I'm going to fight with these and see if I can't get the nut on the bolts. I was able to get the nuts on by doing it the way I said. I put the nut up and turned the bolt. Now, the kit has the plates that go up on top that I showed in the little time-lapse sequence, and one washer. So when you look at that little nylock nut, whatever, the nylon locking nut, it's barely even coming through. The bolt's just touching that. Now, is it critical? Probably not. The primary thing is to have these bolts in place. So I'm going to get those drilled and see if things don't work out. For these holes, I just went straight to the regular size drill to create the pilot like I did in the front, get that little dimple going, and then I followed it up repeatedly with the smaller drill, and then I went to the large drill to finish it off. Here I am using the drill guide to drill straight through to the opposite side frame rail. This system works well. We actually use this a lot in the aircraft industry whenever we're trying to find a matched hole in various panels. So makes it really nice to have that lined up, and then I followed through with the drill bit to make sure it was straight. So I want to do a demonstration for you as well. Here I have this channel piece that, as I've shown, will not go over this frame rail. And there's no way I'm going to stretch this thing or change these dimensions with any equipment that I may have on hand. However, I want to show you, this is the original frame rail. So this would be the driver's side. And I can't use that as an example because it's caved in. This car was rear-ended and this side collapsed. But this is the passenger side, and I'm going to use it as a reference. Look at that. Now, there's a little bit of spacing in there, a little bit of a gap. But this, as you can see, just slips right over that. And that butts up against that bracket, as they talked about. So, I have no choice. There's no way that I'm going to modify the frame rail that's in the car just to make this fit. And as I did on the other one, I will cut this right here. And that'll allow this to come apart. I will put this together and just weld it to the car. So now it will comply. There's my cut on the corner, and that allowed this piece to fit and this piece to come around the other side. So the plan will be, I'm going to weld this. Now what I'll probably do is put some welds on this piece here and here, because initially this is only meant to be held in with a couple of bolts. So I'm going to revise that design, weld this, weld that. I'll end up welding these shut so that we will not be using the bolts. And of course I will do the same thing here. I'll weld the perimeter, weld this back together, and this will be a full front and rear, let's say, weld all the way around. Again, weld the bolt hole shut on both sides, and then it'll have these bolts going through as it was designed. I don't know if this one's so necessary now. If I'm going to weld all this, I may bypass that one, because these two bolts here are the ones that matter. They go for the crossbar that the shocks mount to, and that's more critical. So I may just bypass that, because this is not going to be removed ever again. As I've said, I like to weld downhill, and by doing this, it's a nice, pretty weld, and you're not piling up material like when you go uphill. So I get the front section welded on the inner plate, and I weld the back section of the inner plate. Then I move on to the outer part, and I do the same thing. Weld that back section, and then I welded the front section. Once that's done, I can remove these clamps because it's not going anywhere, and get all that out of the way. And then I started welding from this front edge just to get it started and kind of hold everything in place on that front. And then I moved to the back and worked my way forward. So I added extra weld here, and I ended up grinding it down because I wanted it to have a smooth transition. I also welded up the bolt holes that I won't be using, and I did that on both sides. So you can see this is now part of the car. I have welded the front edge, the back edge, this back edge on the bottom, the inside, and the inside. I have not welded these yet. I probably will just weld these holes shut because they're not necessary at this point, because it is welded solid. I also drilled the holes for these 3/8 bolts, and so I'm going to test fit for the first time the crossbar. And we're going to see no cuts, no bloops, no errors. I'm just going to go for it. I have the bolts setting up there in place, and I really hope, I have not tried this, I really hope this fits. So this goes up against the side, and no, let me turn it this way. I got it the wrong way. This goes to this side. Maybe. Well, it doesn't line up exactly yet. That's a snug fit, as it should be. You want it to be tight, but yeah, this angle. This one looks good. The angle on this other side looks off. Let me reset the camera. Hopefully you can see that. I don't know. So with this unless I can drive this forward, right now this is about 3/4 of an inch behind this hole. The other side is also behind, but look at this gap back here, right? I'm kind of afraid to hit it. I'm gonna knock it up just a little. Nope, ain't happening. So, you can see the gap. You see that gap? Hopefully you can see that gap right back here. What am I going to do with that? I may have to cut the forward edge of the forward edge of this pipe to allow this part to come in just a little, and maybe allow that part to go out just a little. I don't know. This side over here actually looks good as far as the angle and the plate being up against, but this one definitely is not. Oh well, fix it. You know, I think I'm going to try something different. When I cut these plates off of the Spider, it created some problems because when I went to weld this together, it wanted to fight with this thickness, and I'm thinking maybe cutting these off is not the best idea. Leave them where they're at. I did another test fit, and I was able to get like one side to fit really nice, and one side had a gap. And then I could shift it, and I could have one side this side really nice, and this side had a gap. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do, because why not, I'm going to cut it right in the middle. I'll cut this, I'll come up with a sleeve to put inside of that, and then weld this back together once I get it up in position. Because I don't want to play with these anymore and cutting them off and trying to reposition them and get them maybe right or wrong, you know. But with this, now I'm just dealing with a crisscross, like a side-to-side split, and I can compensate width with that rather than mess with those. So I'm going to cut that in half and make it fit. Okay, I want to show you this. I cut this pipe in half, and like I said, I didn't want to cut the ends off and have to fight with getting those back in the right spot. The problem you run into is the alignment of all of these secondary brackets, right? So if I get this off slightly, this end piece, or I get the other one off slightly, then you run the risk of these things not being aligned correctly. So I would rather forego that and use the plates as my guide. Once these are bolted to the car, the index isn't going to change. Now, the problem you run into is how do you connect these two, because they're right now floating in space and they can move all over the place. And this inner diameter here is 1.185, I think is what it comes out to, which is exactly the same as this Craftsman 22 millimeter socket. Let me show you. Look at how well that fits inside of that. And you could actually, if you wanted to, I'm not going to, but I could actually put that socket in there and weld it together and know that it's going to be square. Now, the other thing you run into is when this is bolted in the car, there's still just a little bit of play. You can see that, right? Well, let me show you this. Using a straight edge will help you determine how square this is. So you can put the straight edge here, up here, and you can see that hopefully you can see how much play is still in there. So I don't want to have any of that. I also don't feel like I want to put the socket in because it's only this long. Even though it would work, I'm not going to use it. What I will be using is a piece of pipe that I have that's going to run a great distance between or inside both of these pipes. Now the problem is this is a little bit smaller in diameter than the inside of this pipe. And all we're trying to do is keep this from flexing, right? We're not worried about it being structural. This doesn't need to do anything to hold this together. It just needs to keep an alignment. So what I'll end up using is some foil tape and creating a tight fit. So let me show you. Take that back out. Take that out. Alright, so I have just a little bit of play inside of that pipe. So I'm gonna work on this end, slide this over a little bit so you can see. And ideally, I want to have two spots, like say out here and in the middle, where it's going to be a larger diameter. I don't need to do this whole midsection. I just want to make sure the end is nice and then somewhere in the middle. So what I'll take is some of that tape, and this may take a little bit of trial and error, test fitting, to make it do what I want. But let's just say I took one wrap of tape, or close to it, and put it out here at the end. This isn't super thick. And what I'll do is I'll continue test fitting this pipe until I get the thickness that I need. This time out. And you can be very precise with this if you want. Ideally, it's just creating a filler. You're not worried about being absolutely perfect. You're just taking up space. That's really close with just 2 wraps. I'm going to try one more. And again, I'm just kind of going through this right now. I may take all this back off and redo this, but I'm just showing you for example, just for demonstration. That's pretty close. That's pretty close. So, you get the idea. I'm going to prep this and then show you it assembled so you can see what I'm talking about, it being more square. Okay, here's my fix. So I've done the wrap on the ends, as I said, and also I didn't do one in the dead center because this is actually an aluminum tape. You don't want it to interfere with the weld. So I split the wraps into 2 pieces. So insert this in, and I have a center line. You see how snug that fits now. So there's my rough center line I marked on the pipe, and then I can take the other half and put it on from the other side. And now there's no play. You can see that, hopefully. Got the camera there. There's no play in it. There's no movement. That squares up just like it should. I'm pushing on it. There's no movement. So you can also see that I did have alignment marks on this when I cut it apart. However, I'm not going to weld it here. There's still variables that can come into play. So what I will do is I'll bolt this back into the car. And again, we have to consider the idea, these plates are going to have more, there's going to be paint or there's going to be material added to these when it gets installed later. So what I want to do is add shims again like I did on the front. I put some razor blades in between here and held it away from the other piece that it bolts to. So when it does get welded together, it's not going to be a tight fit. It's going to be just a little bit of a gap to compensate for any, paint thickness and stuff like that. So I'm going to get this up in place and weld it back together. Okay, I have it in place, but I want to show you this first. I picked up this light from Home Depot. It's 25 bucks. It's got 3 different levels of light. It's got magnets on the end here, and you can rotate this thing to get the light where you want it. How about that? So I'm going to set this down just a little. Now, I have everything in place. I have added shims behind these plates so that there is some room there, like I talked about earlier. If there's paint going to be sprayed on these or on these pieces. And I have the tube inside, as I demonstrated, and there's the gap. Now, I had cut out, when I first cut this, I just cut it in half. And after test fitting it several times, I ended up cutting out more material. And let me show you that piece. So this is what I cut out. And you can see that won't even fit back in there. Now mind you, you have to account for the thickness of the cutting blade, right? So 2 cuts, 2 thicknesses of the blade, and right now that won't even fit. So the reason for that is, again, this is dynacorn parts. So the factory frame rails technically are a little bit narrower, and that would have made these pieces be a little more outboard, which would have made more room for this. So I've already compensated. What I'm going to do now is weld this back together. I also put a channel piece here on top and put vice grips on it to help keep everything as square as possible. It's not going to matter much, even though I want to make sure it's as straight as possible. It's not going to matter much if this does deflect a little bit, because these are just mount points for the sway bar, and these are mount points for the shocks, and they're way outboard, right? So if this center section does deflect slightly, it's not going to make any difference on these parts at this point. Primarily the reason I wanted to do this, as I said earlier, was these bolts up here attached to the flanges keep all this in line, and that's why I want to keep this all on the same plane as it is, meant to be. So I'm going to put some welds on that, and of course I'll be taking it back out to finish it, but let me see what I can get done. So let me show you where I'm at in the process. I had to stop because I ran out of argon. The bottle was already low and I left the valve open and it just bled off whatever was in there. But I needed to weld this together, and I got one kind of tack weld going and I had to stop. So I'm not going to be able to finish this part of the project, or this part of the installation. Now, the shocks, I did discover that the 250 pound shocks go in the back. I was speculating previously when I was opening up the boxes and found that in the instructions the 250s go to the rear, and there's a bolt kit for those. So it comes with this upper bolt, and you'll see it's a snug fit up against the transition panel. So you'll have to put the nut up against there and thread the bolt through to make it fit. The lower bolts are larger, and I'll show you where those go, and they connect to the differential. And then the lower bars here, as I've expressed, connect to the basically the frame connector and the spider, all that together. And so I have those hanging just to show you where they go. The other parts, the sway bar, I'm not going to be able to put on just yet. It's going to bolt up through these holes here, and I'll show you the sway bar. And once all that's in place, I can install the differential. The other thing I have to put in later is the panhard bar. So here's the panhard bar. They have it at 37 inches long. It will attach to this location. And you've got 3 sets on here. There's variations of how it's going to make it handle, so you can change that mount point. Also, on the end of the shocks, it does have an adjustment here I put them basically on the outside. You could flip these around and put them however you want, but I just put them there because it seemed more obvious to be able to adjust them. Now, this is the box that the shocks came in, and as I said before, it has the 250 on it. There's also this bag kit, and there are these bushings and these long bolts. And essentially, those bushings and these long bolts attach here. There's 3 locations for those as well. And the lower link bar will attach at this point. And it has an upper and a lower mount point as well there. The sway bar is going to attach here. And then the panhard bar comes across to this mount point. Now, there's more to go. There's a complex system they have that goes on the front of the differential, and that consists of these threaded pipes, some heim joints, and some other things that'll have to be connected together to make it work, and also the torque arm that's going to go from the differential up to the backside of the spider. Now, these are your sway bar mounts, and these are the bushings over here. There'll be more on that later on. I'll show all that being installed at another point, but right now I just have to stop because I'm out of argon. So it's currently New Year's Day and no shops are open to get the bottle filled, so that's the way it goes. But I will say any progress is good progress. Even if you have to fight with stuff to get it to fit the car, it's still progress. So I'm happy with how it's going, and I'm looking forward to getting all the other pieces and parts installed as well. Now, of course, all this will be coming back out to get coated. I think I'm going to use the Steel It spray that I talked about previously. That's probably going to be the coating that I use on all these components. And the underside of the car is going to get either some sort of a primer or undercoating as well. So there's a lot involved with all of that further down the road. But right now I just want to make sure everything fits as it feels like it should. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes they don't fit like you think they should, but you have to make them fit the car. So I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank my patrons especially for supporting me and making these videos. There's a lot of effort that goes into these. I try to put out as much information as I can so that everybody, you, them, everybody can benefit from this. And without them, I don't know that I would do this. So if you're interested in becoming a patron, there is a link in the description box below. There's also a link for the yeswelder that I use, Amazon, any products or parts or tools that I endorse. There are links there as well. So if you're interested, you can follow those links and maybe make a purchase, and who knows, it'll help out a little bit, and every little bit counts. So that'll be it for this video. So until next time, Happy New Year, and take care of yourselves. See ya.